This is a pigeon. This is a missile. If I told you that during World War II, the US military planned to combine these two to create the world's first smart weapon, would you believe me? It sounds like the most absurd science fiction, but it is a real historical file. In this project, the pigeon was not a symbol of peace, but a pilot trained for suicide attacks. Today, we uncover this project that almost changed the course of the war but was sealed away for being too crazy. Project Pigeon. We often imagine World War II as a clash of high technology. Radar, jet engines, the atomic bomb. It seems everything was driven by precise calculation. But the truth is often embarrassing. In the early stages of the war, it was a contest of waste. Allied bombers faced a fatal problem. They simply couldn't hit their targets. Statistics showed that to destroy a specific factory, you needed thousands of bombs for carpet bombing. Most of the bombs landed in fields, in the ocean, or even on civilian homes. The US military desperately needed something that could give the bombs eyes. But in the 1940s, this was a mission impossible. It was an era without transistors, without GPS, and without microcomputers. Electronic equipment at the time was massive and extremely fragile. Trying to stuff a navigation system into the nose of a missile was like trying to fit an elephant into a fridge. Scientists were helpless. Physics seemed to have hit a wall. Just as everyone was stressing over vacuum tubes, a psychologist from the University of Minnesota turned his gaze out the window to the most inconspicuous creatures in the park. His name was B.F. Skinner, a titan of behavioral psychology and an outlier in the scientific community at the time. Skinner watched the pigeons pecking at the ground. He didn't see dirty pests. He saw a perfect, organic flight control system. He proposed a crazy idea. Since we can't build a computer small enough, why not just use the supercomputer nature has already built? Pigeons have sharp vision, incredibly fast reaction times, and this is crucial. They are mass-producible at almost zero cost. And so, Project Pigeon was born. This wasn't a code name. It was literal. Skinner wrote a proposal to the National Defense Research Committee. You can imagine the look on the generals' faces when they opened the file. Are you saying you want to stuff a live bird into our missile and let it fly the thing? It sounded like a bad April Fool's joke. But in desperate times of war, the US military was willing to try anything that held a sliver of hope for victory. To understand the Pigeon missile, we must first understand B.F. Skinner's weapon, operant conditioning. This isn't magic. It is a hack into the brain. The principle is very simple. Reward. If you perform an action and get a seed, you are inclined to repeat that action. Skinner discovered that hunger is the best engineer. He kept the pigeons' weight at 80% of their normal value, keeping them in a constant state of craving. For these pigeons, this wasn't about learning to fly a missile. It was just a game played for survival. The training began. Skinner designed a special harness, like a straitjacket, to secure the pigeon to the test bench. In front of the pigeon was a circular frosted glass screen. Projected onto the screen were blurry images of battleships, actual aerial photos taken by the Allies. There was only one rule. See the ship. Peck it. Whenever the pigeon's beak accurately hit the image of the ship, a mechanism would open, and a grain would fall. Thump. Peck. Eat. Thump. Pecky eat. It was an extreme monotony, and also an extreme focus. But Skinner didn't just want them to peck. He needed them to peck frantically. So, he introduced the logic of gambling. Variable ratio schedule. Sometimes one peck yielded food, sometimes 10, sometimes 50. This sent the pigeons into a frenzy, similar to slot machine addiction. They no longer waited. They attacked the screen with rapid-fire pecks. Data showed that a well-trained pigeon could peck the screen 4 times per second. This frequency was sufficient to serve as a navigation signal to correct the missile's flight path in real time. Imagine this scene. A bird weighing only a few ounces, strapped inside a dark metal shell. It doesn't know if it's over the Pacific or the Atlantic. It doesn't know it will be obliterated upon impact. It only knows that the black dot in the center of the screen is its world's sole desire. In that moment, the pigeon ceased to be an animal. It became a component. It became the first bio-CPU in human history. To house these biological CPUs, the Navy designed a special glide missile, codenamed a Pelican. The nose of the missile wasn't filled with explosives. It was modified into a sophisticated life support capsule. There was an oxygen supply, a shock absorption system, and even temperature control. Because these weren't just weapon components, this was the pilot's cockpit. But Skinner knew that relying on a single Pigeon was too risky. What if the Pigeon suddenly got stage fright? What if it passed out during the dive? The first rule of engineering: redundancy. If a system is prone to failure, install 3. So, the missile head was designed with 3 separate compartments. 3 Pigeons were arranged in a triangle formation, each with its own independent lens and screen. They watched the same target and performed the same task, but they couldn't see each other. It was like a sequestered jury. This was the most brilliant part of the system: the democratic decision-making mechanism. Skinner designed a set of mechanical logic gates. The pecking signals from these 3 Pigeons were aggregated onto a single control valve. If Pigeon A pecked left, and Pigeon B also pecked left, but Pigeon C got distracted and pecked right, the system would automatically ignore the minority and listen to the majority. The missile turns left. This was a perfect application of statistics in war. A single Pigeon might make a mistake, but the probability of 3 well-trained Pigeons making a mistake simultaneously was almost 0. The reaction speed of this system was astonishing. The Pigeon's beak was fitted with a tiny metal conductor. When the metal touched the screen, the circuit closed, and pneumatic valves opened instantly. Hypersure gas pushed the missile fins, changing the flight attitude. The missile turns. The target on the screen moves. The Pigeon pecks again to chase the target. This is a perfect, closed-loop feedback system. In the laboratory, the system performed flawlessly. Now, only one obstacle remained: how to convince those stubborn 5-star generals that this wasn't magic. 1944. Washington, D.C. Skinner walked into a Navy conference room with his team and a few of his best pilots. Sitting in the room were some of the most powerful men in the U.S. military: admirals, weapons experts, defense consultants. The air was thick with cigar smoke and skepticism. Skinner knew perfectly well that scientific data wouldn't be enough here. He had to put on a magic show. He had to make these old-school military men see the miracle with their own eyes. He pulled back the cover. No complex circuit boards, no humming motors, just a Pigeon, blinking, looking at a room full of generals. The demonstration began. Skinner activated the simulator. It was a black box where the Pigeon controlled the signals, which were connected to a mechanical arm across the room. Everyone held their breath. The mechanical arm began to move, tracking the moving target point with precision. Left, right, sharp turn. No lag in reaction, no error in movement. Even when scientists tried to jam the signal, the Pigeon locked onto the target relentlessly. From an engineering standpoint, it was perfect. It was a decade ahead of any gyroscope the U.S. military possessed at the time. However, the problem arose the moment the demonstration ended. When Skinner opened the box to reveal the Pigeon frantically pecking at seeds inside, the atmosphere in the room shifted. One admiral couldn't help but chuckle. Then another. This is the weakness of human nature. If a machine had done this, they would have given a standing ovation. But because it was a bird, it all suddenly seemed like a circus trick. A scientist involved in the evaluation later recalled. There was no technical flaw in the system. The only flaw was that no one could look at it seriously. A few days later, the verdict came down. The Defense Department terminated Project Pigeon. The reason was written euphemistically. The future application of the project is unclear. But Skinner knew the real reason. Not because it couldn't fly, but because it was too absurd. The military would rather spend hundreds of millions developing unreliable electronic components than entrust the outcome of the war to a bird. Those highly trained kamikaze Pigeons were eventually taken home. They didn't have to crash into battleships. They would spend the rest of their lives peacefully in cages. You see, this is the dark humor of history. Sometimes an idea fails, not because it's too crazy, but because it's too far ahead of its time. Shortly after Project Pigeon was cancelled, electronic technology exploded. Radar became smaller and more accurate. The invention of the transistor eventually allowed computers to shrink to a size that could fit inside a warhead. Humans no longer needed to rely on animal nervous systems. We built our own metal brains. The pigeons, once seen as a lifeline, quickly became a joke in the history of science. Skinner himself regretfully said, "Our problem was that we made a product that was too perfect, born in an era that wasn't ready to accept it." But look closely at this action. Sending commands and controlling machines by tapping specific areas on a screen. Does that sound familiar? Sends. This pigeon was the world's first user of a touch interface. Skinner inadvertently predicted the way we interact with technology today. Even the terminal optical guidance of modern missiles shares a logic core shockingly similar to Project Pigeon. Identify image. Lock. On target. Correct trajectory. We just replaced the pigeon with cameras and chips. Even more thought-provoking is its revelation for artificial intelligence. Today, the way we train AI reinforcement learning is essentially a digital version of Skinner's experiments. We no longer feed AI grains. We feed it scores. Do it right, get points. Do it wrong, lose points. When you watch ChatGPT or a self-driving car learn skills through trial and error, you are actually watching that pigeon. We have copied the biological instinct for survival onto silicon chips. History loves to play jokes. Over 70 years ago, we mocked the idea of putting a bird in a missile. Today, we are striving to build drones that fly like birds. B.F. Skinner may not have been a good arms manufacturer, but he proved one thing to us. Intelligence, whether carbon-based or silicon-based, is fundamentally a pursuit of reward. Next time you see a pigeon in the park, show it some respect. If history had taken a slightly different turn, it might have been piloting the most lethal weapon on this planet. Thanks for watching today's crazy history file. Now it's your turn. Do you think Skinner was a misunderstood genius or an animal-abusing madman? If the pigeon missile had actually gone to war, would World War II have ended sooner? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know what you think. This is your channel name, and we dig up those brain-bending moments forgotten by history textbooks. If you like these hardcore and fun facts, please hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next historical decoding. See you in the next video.